Is this okay? Usually I complain it's too low. Today it feels like it's too loud. So, is believe in yourself. And I just wanted to share with you where I got the idea from this. I opened up Facebook this week, and one of the women, Carrie Masters, who I graduated the School of Ministry with, had this on her Facebook page. There was a picture of a bird in a tree, and this was what was underneath it. It said, "A bird sitting in a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because its trust is not in the branch, but in its own wings. Always believe in yourself." So I looked up what Ernest Holmes would talk about this, and Holmes said that too many of us have too low of an opinion about ourselves. He said we need to place a new evaluation on ourselves. He said not out of conceit, but we need to come from a place of humility, a place of wonder, and a place of awe. He said we need to develop a sense of reverence for the life that flows through each and every one of us and through all things. And then there's a quote. He said, "We should think of man as partaking of the creativity of God, carving out his own future and destiny." And so what I took from that is he's saying, you know, we've got this ability to team up with Spirit, with this greatest power on the universe. And so don't go at it with a sense of ego, but look at it with a sense of majesty and awe, that everywhere you are, every moment of your life, everywhere you go, you have this divine presence. Each of us has this divine presence within us. And he also said, you know, the only thing that determines the limits on our demonstration is our belief, because this presence is limitless. It's eternal. It's infinite. And so it's not a matter of its willingness or its ability. The entire thing is a question of our receptivity, how willing we are to open ourselves to this presence. And so I read something this week on the internet, and it must have been from a ways back, I'm guessing. A lady named Joan Sotkin said that she was in a spiritual center in Santa Monica, California. And the only one I know of that was there was Agape, but it's moved several years ago. And she said her life wasn't going well. Her life wasn't working very well. And she was sitting there pleading with God. And I'll bet there's nobody here that hasn't gone through this at some time. And she was sitting there in her head going, "Please, God, please, God." And she heard a voice, she said, that kind of boomed from within her. And the voice said, "Joan, no more please gods. The power is within you. Release it." And she said, like that, in that instant, she realized God wasn't coming down here to fix her life. That she needed to take responsibility for that power, and that she needed to use it to help herself. And you know what else she said? She said it was scary. She said it was scary. And I know in those times when I've gone through that, it is. But it also means that each and every one of us has the power to do whatever we need to do to make ourselves happy and healthy. No more victimhood. Each of us could take control of our own life. So you know, when I did the announcements a few minutes ago, I said that we're going to start a new book on Thursday. And the book that we just finished, I really liked a lot. I know there were some people in the group that weren't as crazy about it as I was, but it was a book by Debbie Ford, and the title of the book is Why Good People Do Bad Things. And the whole book is about getting rid of masks and living who you are. And this week, in her closing chapter, She said, every one of us has the power to make life-altering decisions every day when we get out of bed. She said, we have control over what we say to ourselves when we get up and look in the mirror. And then she asks, if you aren't in charge of your future and your choices, who is? To whom have you turned over your own life? Think about that. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but think how many of us, and I know I've done this, have turned our life over to people that aren't even in our lives anymore, or that we don't remember when they were in our life, but they said something to us that registered, and we're still going on what they want us to do. You know, Holmes, I want to do another Holmes quote. He said, there's a real myself which is forever exists in pure spirit. I had nothing to do with this. I merely awoke and discovered it. I did not give it to myself, and I cannot withdraw myself from it. I can only accept it. So he's saying, you know, you can't say to God, get out of here, I don't want you. You know, you got him, or her. And he's saying, you know, so wherever we go, it works for us. So if you think about that, why wouldn't we put God to work for us? You know? Why? I know we all slip back into ego, but why? Why wouldn't we do it? It's kind of like you put out a help wanted ad and God answers and he works cheap, you know? So why wouldn't we tag on? You know, something else Holmes said. He said, what if you wanted to move your stove into the living room? He said, a lot of people would say that's a pretty eccentric thing to do, to put the stove in the living room. But the law, the spiritual law, doesn't question it. It automatically holds in place things you place in it. And it will operate on your decision. So what that means, think about this, that means if you make the decision that you're capable, if you make the decision that you deserve more good, if you make the decision that you want to have a bigger and a better life, that's the decision that the spiritual law is going to keep in place for you. It all starts with what we believe. I saw a really great affirmation this week. I really liked it, by a lady named Cheryl Sabin. She said, every day say to yourself, I believe I am worth believing in. What if we said it together? I believe I am worth believing in. And she said, you'll be amazed at how the universe will contrive to make that so. If we can say that all the time, I believe I'm worth believing in. So I want to tell you a story I read on the minister's listserv this week. And one of the ministers wrote that he was a former RSI minister, and he said the first year he was in ministry, the first year, he was having a really bad day, a really crummy day, and he couldn't reach his mentor minister to speak to her. And he had a prayer partner, and her phone kept going to voicemail, and he said it was way before texting, so I was on my own. So he picked up a copy of the Creative Thought magazine that I just told you was going to go out of business at the end of the year. He picked up a copy of that, and he randomly opened it and turned to a prayer. Now, it's called a spiritual mind treatment, is what we call our form of prayer. So he turns to this prayer, and he starts to read it. And he says to himself, wow, this is a beautiful prayer. This prayer is really touching my heart. And he said, and it had a great quotation above it. And when he got done reading it, he was in a way better place. So he decided to find out who the minister was that wrote it. And he was going to call the minister up and thank him or her and ask them to pray with him. And he did. And you know who wrote it? He had. He had written it. You know, there's a very long lag time when you write for one of these magazines and when it gets printed, like it's 4 months. So he didn't remember. He wrote it. And so here he was looking for comfort, and his own words were what was comforting him. And he said, what he learned from that, he wrote, each of us has the power within us to change our own thinking and our own actions. Each of us has the ability to do that. And here he did it for himself and didn't even know it. So I read an exercise that we could all try by a lady named Martha Beck. And I'm going to tell you what the exercise is. And she calls it your everybody committee. Your everybody committee. So I am going to read 4 sentences to you. I'll do them twice in case anybody wants to write them down. And what she asks you to do is to complete these sentences. Here they are. Everyone wants me to. Everyone wants me to. Everyone thinks I'm. Everyone thinks I'm. Everyone expects me to. Everyone expects me to. Everyone's always telling me. Everyone's always telling me. So she asks you to, in your time, complete those sentences. And then she says, try to think of specific people that are telling you that. Try to think of specific people that are telling you that. And what she said is, in her experience of counseling loads of people, most of us have a very small committee. Sometimes as small as 1 person, and almost never more than 6 people. And what we do, she said, think about this now. What we do, we project these few people onto everybody. And it brought to mind, when Becky and I were in Arizona, I asked one of the women who sang for us on Sundays if she would do some charity work with me at a clinic for people that has Alzheimer's. And so the 2 of us were riding in my car, and we were just chatting. And this woman, she had such a wonderful voice, and she played the guitar, and she wrote music. And I said, God, how long have you been singing? And she said, when I was about 10 or 12, I was singing in my room, and my mother came in and said, God, you got a terrible voice. You can't sing. She said, I didn't sing for 15 more years. One person did that to her. Becky, I've talked about this before, her loving family telling her artists don't make money. It wasn't a whole world. It was a mother, a brother, and an aunt, and you generalize that, so she stopped doing art. I'm going to talk about that a little more later. And so what Beck says is when things like this happen, we, instead of doing what our heart calls us to do, what we do, and we have no joy in it. And we're not created to live lives that are joyless. At least I don't believe we are. We're created to live joyful lives and to feel that we're good enough. Not to go around feeling that we're not okay. Alan Cohn, who's a wonderful writer, says that the odds of the world are determined by the beliefs of the world. The odds of the world are determined by the beliefs of the world. And if you don't subscribe to the odds of the world, you're not subject to them. You're not subject to them. That we can create our own odds by relying on a higher power. And that's what all the quotes I did before from Holmes are saying, that we have a higher power that's within us. And when we believe it, and when we recognize it, and when we open ourselves to it, we move out of the odds of the world saying, well, this is what everybody does, because we know we have the power that created everything that's really doing the work for us. So Barbara DeAngelis, in one of her books, talks about getting in a cab one day and having a conversation with the cab driver. And he said to her, I wasn't always a cab driver. He said, I used to be in sales, and I drove around a lot, all over the country. He said, I was on the fast track. And he said, I was away from home a lot. I didn't see my wife, and I didn't see my kids a lot, but I made big bucks. I made a lot of money. And my father, who came over here from Poland, and who worked with his hands, I knew how proud my father was of me, and that meant a lot to him. And then he said, one day about 10 years ago, my young son got hit by a car, and my wife couldn't find me, because he traveled all over the country. And he said, when she finally got a hold of me, when I finally called her back, she was hysterical. And she said, I can't go on like this. I can't keep doing this. And he said he reached the hospital in record time. And he walks into the hospital, and what Barbara DeAngelis wrote, her exact words were, he said, my wife looked like hell. I had a daughter that couldn't stop crying. And my son is lying in the bed, unconscious, with tubes sticking out all over him and all bandaged up. And he said, I fell apart. I fell apart. And in that moment, I said to myself, I am getting my life back. I quit my job, and I bought a cab. He said, these 10 years have been the best years of my life. I've watched my children grow up. My wife and I have our marriage back. He said, I can call her my best friend again. I couldn't do that 10 years ago. And he said, we saved up a little money, and we have a little cabin on a lake. He said, my life is so good. And Barbara DeAngelis said that she asked him, she said to him, if you had one piece of advice that you've learned about how to be happy, what would it be? And she said he thought for a really long time, and he said, you have to say no to things. You have to say no to things. You need to release what doesn't serve. You need to live what's in your heart. And so I'm sure he would say, it was really cool to be a sales guy and to have a lot of money and be on the fast track and have his father proud of him. But look at the life he had. He didn't see his kids. His wife didn't want it anymore. And driving a cab gave him back what he wanted. He was able to release what didn't serve. And I've spoken about this in some of the classes Beck and I have taught, but when I made the decision to go from having my own business to going into the ministry full time, I said to Becky, let's do one last big vacation in Hawaii. So we went to Hawaii, and we were lying by the pool having Mai Tais, and it was really nice. And I turned to her, and I said, are you sure you want me to go into this full time? Because we're never going to have a vacation like this again. And she looked at me, and she said, that's a really good thing for a religious science minister to put it out in the universe, isn't it? And the second thing she said to me was, I want you to do what's in your heart. I want you to do what makes you happy. And we've had lots of great vacations. We've been back to Hawaii more times since than we were ever there before. It works out when you're doing what you love. Mark Gaffney is a rabbi, and he in his book Soul Prince, he says every one of us has a gift to give, and along with the gift comes a responsibility to give it. You have to give it. And he said, in order to do that, we need to free ourselves from limitations and false notions and ideas that we have about ourselves. But when we do it, not only does it work for us, but it shows other people how they can do it too. That's how we affect the rest of our world. When people spill cold water on our dreams, anytime I suppose, but particularly when we're young, we internalize what they say to us, and so often we quit before we ever start. You know, and I've talked about this, so I won't go into it. When I was going to start my own business, except for Becky, every friend I knew told me I was going to fail. Everyone. They said, you're never going to make it. What a dopey idea. And in the first 6 months, I made more money than I ever made in any year that I worked in my entire business career. And when I met Becky, she had stopped doing her art. And so I've told this story in a couple of classes. But the idea is you can start small. You don't have to quit your job and you know, do something full time. You can do it small. So I stole her portfolio one day, and I brought it. I worked for Mattel Toys when we met, and I brought it in to the senior vice president of design in the division. And I said, take a look at this. Tell me what you think it is. And he opened it up, and he went, oh my, this is great stuff. And he said, you did this? And I said, oh, no. I said, my girlfriend, but she's not doing art anymore. And he reached out and he gave me his card. And he said, you tell her to call me. She needs to be doing art. And so she started small. She went, you know, she didn't quit her job. She went to her friends and said, you know, I do portraits. How'd you like to get a loved one a portrait for Christmas? And 4 people in my department paid her to do Christmas portraits for loved ones or themselves or their wives. You know, we can start small. Mary Mannon Morrissey, I learned this from her in a class one time. She said, don't say, I can't do that. Don't say, I never did it. Say, up until now. That is so freeing, those 3 words. If you say, up until now, I've never had the guts to get up and play my guitar and sing. Or up until now, you know, whatever it is. I guess what I'm saying is don't let people that are toxic stop you from living your life. You know, even if you don't succeed to the degree that you want to, you can learn something from it and start again. And the other thing is, the last time, 2 weeks ago when I was here, I spoke about spiritual community. Instead of surrounding yourself with people that are going to tell you what not to do, surround yourself with people that are going to love you and support your dreams. You know, I was thinking about this when I was meditating out in the car before I came in today. I was thinking, I honestly cannot remember, and Becky and I started in religious science in 1990. I can't ever remember one time being in a class situation, being in a book group, being in any kind of discussion group where somebody said, I got a dream, and somebody else said, oh my God, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. You can't do that. I've never seen that, you know. I've seen it outside, but I have never seen it in a spiritual community. Iris Krasnow is a lady that said, you know, we can ask ourselves, how can I shift from the ordinary to the extraordinary? How can I make a shift from the ordinary to the extraordinary? And she writes about a guy. His name is Lewis, and at the time she was interviewing him, he was 43 years old. When he was 26, 17 years before, he was diagnosed with HIV, and initially thought he was a dead man, but he's lived 17 years. And listen to this now. I mean, here's somebody with a substantial physical ailment. He said to her, if somebody came to me and said, you have any 3 wishes you want, he said, one of my wishes would not be to do away with my HIV. I wouldn't want to be different. He said, HIV gave me the purpose for being here. HIV gave him the purpose for being here. He said, I am perpetually grateful for the people in my life who love me and support me. I am perpetually grateful for the God within. And he said, the question he continually asks himself is, how can I stay true to myself with every step I take? He said that there's no right or wrong answer on how one should lead their life. But he said what he knows in his life is every choice he makes is to be true to himself. Every choice. And when you look at it like that, what a gift that HIV is to him. He said, I understand the power of today. And what I would suggest to you is, you don't have to get sick to understand that. You don't have to lose a job to understand that. You don't have to lose a loved one to understand that. You can just make the decision that you, as Debbie Ford said, are in control of your life, and that with you and the divine presence, you're going to lead the life that you choose to lead. Jean Houston wrote a book called The Wizard of Us, which is kind of a takeoff on the Wizard of Oz. And in the book, she said, you know, one of the lessons to learn from the lion is that courage isn't synonymous with being fearless. Courage isn't synonymous with that. That the lion shows all of this bravado because he wants to hide his fear and his insecurity. So it's an act. But he goes on. And what she says is, going on against all odds is the heart of courage. Going on against all odds. So, you know, people, I read something, I don't remember the exact saying now, that Mike Tyson said, you know, when he was growing up and learning how to box, what kept getting beaten into him is, it's not that you're not going to be afraid, it's that you've got to move beyond the fear. That's the difference between people who are successful and people that aren't. So I want to close with a quote that Jean Houston has in this book. It's not from her, it's from a woman named Catherine Martin, who wrote a book titled Those Who Dare, Real People, Real Courage. And here's the quote. She said, one way we keep ourselves small is by thinking we're not good enough. We're not smart enough, not gregarious enough, not witty enough, not savvy enough, not pretty enough, not educated enough, not clever enough, not romantic enough, not enough, endlessly not enough. When rooted in childhood, these feelings of not being enough can come from parents, teachers, authority figures, cliques we never belonged to, kids we wanted to be like, or friends who dumped us. Somewhere inside us are dreams and desires we haven't made good on because that little gnat keeps buzzing around our head. You're not smart enough to do that, or you're not clever enough, or are you kidding? Or you're not experienced enough for that. What does your gnat say? What about you isn't good enough? Who told you that? What does it keep you from doing? And then lastly, she says, imagine what you could do if you knew without a doubt you were enough. What would you do? God bless you. And thank you all for being here.